All right. Hi, everyone. Um, Thank you for joining us for Rethinking Land Acknowledgements today on Indigenous Peoples Day 2023. Today, we're joined by Steph Littlebird, who will be leading the discussion. Next slide, please. And all right, I'm just going to introduce Steph real quick. So Steph Littlebird, she is an artist, author, curator, and enrolled member of Oregon's Grand Ronde Confederated tribes. Steph earned her B.F.A in Painting and Printmaking from the Pacific Northwest College of Art in Portland, and she currently lives and works in Las Vegas. Steph is known for her vibrant graphic imagery that combines traditional styles of her Indigenous ancestors with contemporary illustration aesthetics. So you can see a few examples on the left of the slide here. Her work has often examined issues related to Native identity, cultural resilience, and responsible land stewardship. Her first children's book, My Powerful Hair, was released in 2023 in collaboration with author Carol Lindstrom and Abrams Books. Steph has been commissioned by brands like Lucasfilm, Yahoo, Lunabar, and featured by media outlets like PBS News, NPR, and Art News. So thank you for joining us today, Stephanie, and for leading this conversation. I'm gonna turn my mic and video off now and hand it off to you.
Hi, Umasi. Thank you so much, Nika, and thank you to everyone who is tuning in to our chat today. I am honored to just be here and get to share some of this information with folks. As a Native person who is sort of constantly interacting with the public and speaking about Indigenous history, both my own local history as a tribal person, but also national history. This is a sort of a common topic that continues to come up. And so I think that a lot of people are going to really enjoy today and get to learn a lot and hopefully walk away with some tangible things that they can actually take away from this, as opposed to just words on a piece of paper. So as Nika mentioned, my name is Steph Littlebird, and I am a descendant of the Chinook and Kalapuyan tribes of Oregon, whose traditional tribal territory is sort of in the Willamette Valley, which includes part of the Portland area as well. And in my regular day life, I am an illustrator, artist, and writer. I do curate as well occasionally. So yeah, but the work you see on the screen is some of my favorite stuff from this last year. As Nika mentioned, my first children's book up in the corner there was released, as well as a book cover that I did for Star Wars, which is sort of a super nerd, exciting thing for me, just because I have always loved Star Wars, and this opportunity was just like crazy for a Native person to get to do a book cover for them. So that was amazing. And yeah, so that's the work that I do that I get paid for, but I also make a lot of work that's not so kid friendly necessarily, like the work you see on the bottom, which may be a little bit more forward or aggressive. So, but aside from that, I am someone who likes to share the sort of experience of Indigenous people with others, so that they might better understand the needs of our community and maybe be better allies going forward. I think the people who are tuning in today are tuning in because they care and they want to be able to move in the world in a way that offers allyship to others. And so I hope that I can give watchers some tools in order to do that better going forward. So the first thing I wanted started with was to not even really talk about land acknowledgement yet, which is really just to sort of give people a primer for contemporary Indigenous life and sort of what we as Native people are experiencing, and sort of the unique nuances of our lives, which are very different than many other people in this country. And we do absolutely have different cultural values, but they're impacted by a lot of things that are political and sort of of out of our control and related to our complicated history with this country. And so I like to start by just letting people know that the United States has 562 federally recognized tribes. That means the federal government says that they are entitled to sovereignty, they are entitled to self-determination, among other things. But that being said, you should know that not all tribes have federal recognition, and there are actually more than 1,000 other tribes in this country that don't have federal recognition. I mentioned before that I am from the Chinook and the Kalapuyan tribes, and the Chinook tribe is not federally recognized. And so part of my heritage is not recognized by the federal government. It's only recognized on state level government. So that means that those tribes that are not recognized essentially don't have access to the same resources as federally recognized tribes. So it's absolutely a privilege for me to be in a federally recognized tribes because some of my literal relatives are not. And so it's a very complicated, non-scientific and relatively arbitrary system that we are sort of confined within as Indigenous people in the US. So federal status is political in that there are many natives who don't have that status but are absolutely living Indigenous life, and they are valid, and that does not make them any less native just because their tribe is not federally recognized. Also, this book that's on the screen actually just came out this year by Matika Wilbur, who's an Indigenous person, and she actually documented the 562 tribes, and it is an incredible book. It is massive and also a great way to learn about the different tribes in the country. So a part of being a Native person and being federally recognized is that you are actually subjected to something called the blood quantum system. It is a flawed system that is actually not really based on science, since it was created before genetics could even be measured. And it is the exact opposite of the one drop rule that is applied to Black Americans. So, if you are African American and you have, or if you are, mixed, then if you have one drop of African American in you, then you will always be Black. You could never be, say, a white person. And so our identity is defined differently by the government, which is like essentially trying to make us go away over time. So many tribes have different blood quantum sort of standards to be a part of their tribe. My tribe has a very strict blood quantum because we're a very small tribe, but other tribes in the country have quantum that goes all the way back to first contact. So, there are different definitions. Each tribe defines it differently. So that means that every Indigenous person really has a different experience than the next Indigenous person. So our identities are super complex, and that and they're not this, they're just like, there is no way to sort of get like the sort of typical Indigenous experience. So as I'm presenting to you today, I'm really giving it to you from my perspective, which is trying to share the many perspectives of my community, but I know that I'll never be able to cover them all. So I do my best to sort of honor all of those perspectives as I'm sharing with you today. So, keep this in mind as you're navigating relationships or interactions with Indigenous people. Please do not ask them how much they are, because that is a deeply personal question. It is also a really violent question, and it is sort of revealing your lack of knowledge about the sort of political nature of the blood quantum system. So I always just suggest not to ask those things, and respect and honor people's identities, just as, other people's identities are respected and honored. All right. So another thing about Native people that seems kind of obvious after I say it, I'm sure, but we have something called place-based identity. And so all Native people, all Native tribes, they all have very different identities based on the places that they come from. So the way that I can talk about this personally is that I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. I grew up in Oregon in this like bosom of green trees, always raining, but very lush, beautiful. The rivers are a core part of our experience as Indigenous people, and our daily as well as like yearly lives are very much attuned to the cycles of the Pacific Northwest. But I moved to Las Vegas a few years ago, and I am in a completely different landscape in the desert with the Paiutes. And the Paiutes have completely different traditions than we do. And their seasonal traditions are completely different because this is a very different landscape. And so their lives are very much attuned to the landscape of the desert. Whereas, my tribal life is very much attuned to the Willamette Valley. And so when you interact with Indigenous people, try not to place them under the umbrella and make assumptions about the way that they might celebrate certain things or think about even I've had this question about like animals and what symbolism is associated with them. Every tribe will have different symbolism, so we can't always apply these ideas to every single tribal person. And so we try to sort of as Indigenous people respect the diversity within our community because there are so many different ways of life within the Indigenous experience. So part of the culture of place-based identity is the things that we're taught. So as I mentioned, we have a sort of deep relationship with the cycles of the land. And so that also means taking responsibility for the land. We are considered stewards of the land, and that's something that is passed down from generation to generation. We sort of are responsible for cultivating the land sustainably. And in that, we think about the future generations who come after us and managing the land, not just for ourselves, but for them as well, managing for abundance. And so many people don't know this because we are called hunter-gatherers, but Native people across this country as well as across the world have always been sort of engineering the landscape. And so as it is with tribes in the Pacific Northwest as well as the Amazon forest, which is an engineered landscape. Many people don't know that. It's like it was intentionally cultivated by tribes for thousands of years to produce the abundance that it does. It's a very special landscape because of Indigenous interaction and care. And so in this image is actually someone from the Quinault tribe, which is a tribe north of my traditional homelands, but we have traditions that we share with them each year, part of that being canoe journey, and I'll share some images of that as well. But tribes have also traditions of interacting and sharing. So these things relate to the land always, and that they are cyclical, and they very much are we do things in honor of the land because we recognize that we come from the land. And so our values are very much rooted in protecting those sort of cycles of stewardship and, respect for, those non-human entities that we reside on this land with. So as I mentioned, canoe journey. So the image of the woman on the right-hand side of the screen is one of my tribal chairwomen, Cheryl Kennedy. And on the left-hand side of the screen is a picture of canoe journey. So what happens each year is that tribes from the South will actually ride their canoes along the coast. And this includes my tribe, the Grand Ronde, which Grand Ronde is called the Confederation of Grand Ronde, which actually includes 30 different bands and tribes from around Oregon, Washington, and California. So my confederation, my reservation was like a place where they took all kinds of people from all over the place and put them together. So many of us are not necessarily even related by lineage, but because of colonization, we are sort of forced to build communities together. And so our confederation, which includes Malala, includes Chinook, Calipoyan people, includes all of these different tribes together. And so this trip each year is like very much a part of bonding our tribe, but also our tradition of meeting with the Quinault tribe up north, which is like, I mean, hours drive north. It's like 6 hours drive, but the canoe journey takes days. And so the families get together each year and do this, and we meet our sort of cousin tribes up north. And when we say we are still here, what we mean by that is that even though our histories have been erased in many ways, and that, you know, the reason I have to start this whole presentation with history is because many people really just don't know anything about Indigenous people and have sort of like movie-based conceptions of what our lives are like. But we are actually just here living our lives. We're your neighbors, we're your friends, we're artists, we're doctors, we're teachers, we're all kinds of things in the world, but we are also living a life of tradition. And so we are, our identities are kind of complex in a contemporary sense, because we end up sort of walking in two different worlds a lot of the time. We are, you know, honoring tradition, we remain connected to our culture, but we also have to live in the regular world and be a part of capitalism. So we are sort of navigating that just as everyone does day to day, but we do it with this sort of rooted sense of tradition that remains within us, and absolutely is integral to our community as well. It's like this centerpiece of why we are resilient and why we were able to survive colonization is due to the strength of our community and the strength of that sort of always coming back to the culture. That is what held us together this long. All right, so thinking about you know, what we do in terms of the tribes and sort of our hand on the land now, since we a lot of us have complex relationships with the federal government or with state governments, but a lot of us work in tandem with governments to restore our lands. So I wanted to share this specific example, which is from my tribe in Portland. And as you can see on the left-hand side, this waterfall, which actually, prior to there being a paper mill constructed on it, was actually the strongest waterfall on the West Coast and only second to Niagara Falls. So essentially the second strongest waterfall in the country resides in the Willamette Valley in essentially right outside of Portland, Oregon. And my tribe, as well as many other tribes in the region, consider this a sacred place. This is sort of the origin of creation in many ways, and it's a place where we have hunted and gathered for, you know, eons. And right now, our tribe and the science can currently agree on 20,000 years. So for at least 20,000 years, we have been fishing these waters. And then through colonization and the industrialization of Portland, Oregon, they took this beautiful landscape and built a paper mill on it. So that paper mill has been decommissioned. It is no longer running, and the tribe is actually working with the government to remove all of the apparatus from this original sort of polluting monstrosity of of a building complex, whatever you want to call it. So we are rehabilitating the land and actually working with local governments to turn this into the sort of beautiful thing that it used to be, and it will be accessible to all communities, not just Indigenous communities, and be sort of like you know, what we hope will be the gem of the Pacific Northwest. So we're really excited to see this land be restored. And so that's part of the work that our tribe does, is taking places like this that have been destroyed and working to rehabilitate them. And that also includes what's happening on the left-hand side of the screen, which is talking about lamprey. And so lamprey is a traditional food that our tribe, as well as many others in the area, would come to the falls to collect. And we are able to now begin this tradition again. We're so excited to have access to the falls and be able to sort of start interacting with this area in a way that we really haven't been able to for many generations, essentially, because of the industrialization. And then no one is really allowed to be there except for those people who worked at the paper mill, essentially. So yeah, it's very exciting. This is a sacred site, and something that the future generations will get to enjoy again in a way that our past generations really just unfortunately have not been able to. So, and then here's a sketch of that. And just this idea that our tribe is not only trying to enrich itself and not only trying to improve the landscape for itself, but for the whole community, so that it can be enjoyed by everyone in our community, not just tribal community. And so that is a value that I think is very important, and why I do the work that I do, including presentations like this, because I want people to understand that our values really carry through in everything that we do. And that while we have very complicated history with the American government and the colonization of this country, we also have the capacity to empathize and recognize the power of community and the idea that we must share our abundance with others. And that doesn't just stop at, the tribal doors. It includes those who are non-tribal. And so I'm very proud to be from a tribe that has those values and very much wants to enrich the lives of others, not just its own members. So now that we've thought about these things, and we can sort of place them into context when we're talking about a land acknowledgement. So what is a land acknowledgement? And I think that a lot of people really just don't think about this basic question before they start writing these things. So I'm going to sort of define it in my own words, and then we'll talk about what, who's that really serving. So a land acknowledgement to me as an Indigenous person is a sort of recent trend. While it's been trending for probably a decade, it's like in the last 5 years, it's just like really intensified. You have institutions who are basically requiring a land acknowledgement to be spoken before every meeting, or everyone has to have their own individual ones. And it's sort of like this sign of being progressive, and that that institution is trying to acknowledge the history of the land, the former stewards of the land, that they are specifically standing on. So usually it's a very local specific statement related to where they are, which is at least a start. So that is what a land acknowledgement is to me. Who are they for, though? So that's a great question, because as I have just shown you, Native people very much acknowledge the land. We love the land. We spend so much time thinking about the land and how we can be better stewards of it and how we can preserve it for future generations. And so my guess is that land acknowledgements actually they're not for me. They're not for natives. They're actually for non-natives. And so when we think about what that means, I think of land acknowledgements as a sort of first step. So if you're going to write a land acknowledgement and actually go through all of the trouble of learning about your local tribes, then that's a great step towards allyship. But the acknowledgement in itself is something that I think causes bitterness in many folks' minds, particularly Native people, because what comes after the acknowledgement? What happens after we acknowledge things? Like, this is a really poor sort of metaphor, but this is how I explain it to people. if someone broke into your home and robbed you and stole all of your stuff and then decided they were not going to leave your home and then just maybe keep your home too, and you came home to this and that person said, I acknowledge that I stole all your stuff and I stole your house. That doesn't change the fact that you stole all my stuff in my house. So a land acknowledgement really doesn't do a whole lot for Indigenous people because we're already doing the work that the land acknowledgement is sort of like trying to catch up on. So what I ask people to do is to think about, after the land acknowledgement, after we say these things, that we recognize genocide occurred, that we recognize the original inhabitants of this land, what comes next? So I think that before you can be an ally, before you can offer aid or help, or even what you think is like recognition through a land acknowledgement, you actually have to understand what Native people are facing as a community right now. Aside from the history, which I've shared with you, that's very complex, aside from all of the other things that we know about what has happened in American history with the assimilation of Indigenous people, which is a whole nother conversation, we are, still as a community very marginalized, and also like dealing with the history that we have sort of inherited while simultaneously like trying to live our lives. So, our main concerns start with severe marginalization. What does that mean? It means we're like literally invisible. We are, most people don't know anything about us. They have no idea what our histories are, especially our unique location histories in terms of like my tribe's experience versus another tribe's experience with assimilation, very different. We also have horrible rates of substance abuse, alcoholism, drug use. We are battling a lot of things that really make it hard to have like a joyous life when we are dealing with intergenerational trauma. Intergenerational trauma is this idea of, sort of receiving the pain and anguish and anxiety and anger, madness, whatever, from your predecessors. And that's something that's scientifically proven. They know that this is true, that those, mothers pass down the anxiety of their bodies to their children. And they know that it comes through the DNA of your grandparents as well. So the experiences of your ancestors is absolutely passed down to you. Aside from those things, which are, psychological, then you have the scarcity. We have, tribes who can't even get access to clean water. As example, the Navajo Nation and, the Supreme Court basically saying we we don't have to give you guys water. Y'all should just figure that out for yourself. Under all of these treaties that have been sort of slowly but surely broken down over the last couple hundred years. And so then on top of not being able to really survive, living in poverty, not having access to clean water or good food. A lot of us are not eating traditional diets. We are struggling with obesity, diabetes, all kinds of things because our traditional diets were taken away. And then on top of all those things, it's climate change. Climate change is impacting our way of life. As I mentioned, everything that we do as Indigenous people sort of revolves around the cycles of the land, and the land is changing dramatically. And most Indigenous people will tell you, like, we've been able to see this coming. But when you have people who won't even acknowledge that those changes are occurring, we're sort of like, we're up against a brick wall of a battle. And so these are things that are on a day-to-day basis absolutely impacting our well-being and our ability to thrive in this world. So, other things that are sort of lower concerns are things like honoring the treaties, which goes to the idea of having access to clean water. We are placed on reservations without really any choice. We were signing these treaties under duress, essentially. And the government we sign them with won't even honor it. My tribe in particular, just this year, had to go back to court and argue for its hunting rights, something that we were promised in treaties hundreds of years ago. We're still having to argue with the government about. And so the last and final concern, which is a very important concern, was sort of like really would resolve quite a few of these problems, is actually land back, and this idea of returning Indigenous people to their rightful roles as the stewards of their land. We have, as I mentioned, we've been on the land at least 20,000 years. We have a lot of knowledge that we can offer to non-natives in terms of managing the land to be more abundant and to be less volatile. But if no one will listen to us, then we can't really implement those changes, which will benefit not only tribal people, but all people who are living on those lands. So how can we go beyond the land acknowledgement? How do we go beyond saying, yes, I recognize all these horrible things happen? How do we make an impact on that problem, and also just like help us help you? Native people aren't just pitiful creatures. We have all of this knowledge that we carry, and we just are so marginalized that really no one's willing to listen. And so we need people to listen to us first and foremost. We don't need allies who are wanting to prescribe the answer. We need you to listen to our concerns first, so that we can work on an answer together that actually befits the problem. So instead of a land acknowledgement, what about making a commitment? So I learned this idea of a land commitment from an elder of mine, an elder artist of mine. And he said, yeah, I hear all these white people talking about land acknowledgements, but like, what about a land commitment? What about actually making a commitment to do something? And so every person's ability to commit to something is going to be different. Individually, we all have different levels of access and resources. So the answer to this question is really dependent on who's listening. But there are different ways that we can make an impact and make it through a commitment. So I wanted to give some examples of land commitments, things that are happening in our world today, right now, through institutions that are making these real, true, tangible commitments to the Indigenous community. So Oregon State, some of these examples are from the Pacific Northwest, because I myself am from this area and I'm seeing a lot of these changes, which is very exciting. Oregon State is offering students that are native from any of the federally recognized tribes to come and get their education with in-state tuition. And so that is like such a huge barrier. As a native person who graduated college, I am like 1% of Indigenous people. So it's very rare that we go to college, let alone graduate college, let alone for something so ridiculous as being an artist. So I am a very privileged person, and I recognize that access to education for Indigenous people, especially higher education, is so far out of our range. And so institutions like these universities that are on the lands of tribal people, by extending their resources to us, by saying we're going to waive your tuition, that enables us to sort of become decision makers in the world and actually get to do the things that are necessary for our community. We need more natives to get higher education so that they can, be in the system and actually make changes within it. So that is something that's like amazing, and a perfect example of making a commitment, right? Also, just literally governments saying, hey, we've had this land and it's, government land or whatever. We're going to just give it back to you because we're not actually maintaining it. We're not taking care of it. We just have it because we're the government. So in the case of Washington giving the Colville tribe back some of their traditional homelands, this starts this process of renewing the land, restarting land stewardship within the tribal community, but also like creating abundance for the future, which will benefit not only the Colville tribe, but those who are living in the lands near them. And so this is like one of those beautiful examples of land back, where literally the land is being given back. There is no like strings attached. It's like, here you go. And that's how it should be. We shouldn't have to beg for it. In the case of my tribe, we've had to literally buy our reservation back. So there are better ways to honor the commitments that were previously made through colonization. Some other examples, a native tribe about to get land back from, their basically a really painful piece of their history happened. The Sioux Agency in Minnesota getting this land back where a horrible massacre happened with, the U.S. military, but it is a place that that tribe is connected to, and they absolutely should be able to go back to. In the second, on the right side, the Rappahannock tribe getting back their access to the shoreline of water. Water is a huge part of tribal culture in many cultures, not so much out here in the Paiute section, but in these places where rivers are really important to the daily lives of tribal people, getting access back to the water for this tribe is huge. And also being able to take care of the wellness of the water, that's a whole nother thing outside of land back, is like, well, water back too, like we should be maintaining these waterways and making sure that they are healthy, because everybody needs water, not just Native people. All right, and so a couple last examples here, just like also another thing is Indigenous foods, because of the colonial diet, many Indigenous people have like lost connection to their traditional way of life and just like literally what they eat day to day. And that has horrible health ramifications that are inherited generation over generation. And so the idea of, state representatives or institutions making connections with tribal people to sort of create more opportunities for getting back to our traditional way of life, including the food that we eat. And again, talking about water is this like idea of restoring places where fish, wetlands, for bird habitats, things like that are really sort of, if those places are healthy, then we know the land is healthy. If the water is healthy, we know the land is healthy. And so we need to take care of these places because they will ensure our health and the health of the land as well. All right, so about commitment, as I said, everyone can contribute different stuff. Not everyone has the same access, right? So the first thing you can do is just start by learning. Things like, listening to me talk today is one of those ways that you can learn about tribal people and the concerns that we have today, but also like learn about your local tribes. So as I mentioned, 562 tribes. That's a lot. That means that pretty much everyone's on native land. So you should know what land you're on and who are the traditional stewards of that land. Get to know their history. Start there, start local, as opposed to feeling like overwhelmed by having to learn the whole history of the indigenous existence. Don't do that. Start local, because it'll really give you a sense of the experience of many indigenous people. Be a land steward yourself. It doesn't like, you can make a commitment without having to like go call a native person and ask them what to do. You can just like literally contribute to the land. So whether that means participating in local volunteerism, thinking about how you can contribute to the resilience of the land you're on and the community that you are a part of. So thinking about a recent event like the Burning Man event in the desert, where all of these people just left all of their trash behind. That is not being a responsible land steward. That is, causing the collapse of local ecology. So, make better decisions that contribute to the betterment and the abundance of the future, as opposed to the destruction of the present. And also just thinking about through education and also being just like a participant in your community, you can sort of become better informed and make even more commitments once you understand what is needed, right? As opposed to like trying to prescribe an answer. Don't do that. Just start by learning, because it will become apparent through the learning process what you can do. So, the ways in which you can build connections with your community, with Indigenous people, but maybe other people that are not Native. There are plenty of people in the world to build connections with in your community. And that in itself will help us all sort of collectively create a better future for one another. So, in the end, I will just say again, learning is a big part of being an ally. And so instead of regurgitating land acknowledgements, we should just be trying to learn so that we can be more well-versed and educated about the needs of the people that we are trying to help. So I highly recommend just like tuning into the Native world. So there's so many different websites, but I listed a few here that you can tune in if you want to know about Native sort of happenings and world events. But then these books as well are great ways to jump into the history. I definitely recommend the Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States to everyone. It is a way to sort of like get a taste of sort of the process of colonization for Indigenous people. It's a really great read. And yeah, so thank you all so much for listening, and appreciate you guys taking the time.
All right. Thank you, Stephanie, for that very insightful presentation. I really hope that people take the time to really take this all in and think about everything that, Steph said, and really learn about the Native communities that live near you, what their contemporary issues are, and really, making a commitment more than just an acknowledgement. So thank you, Stephanie, and thanks for everyone for watching and listening today. If you're on Instagram, make sure to give Stephanie a follow. And really, if you'd like more information about Mata Art Gallery and the programs we do, just head over to our website. And if you have any more questions for Stephanie, you can go ahead and send us an email, and we'll make sure that your messages will get sent to Steph. And I will make sure to include all this information below in the description. And really just want to say thank you also to everyone who helped to make this presentation possible. Of course, Steph, the main person, but also, our technical support, Michael, who's here hanging out with us, and also the Vibrant Cities Arts Grant from the BAS Projects and the City of Los Angeles Department of Cultural Affairs. Thank you again. And really, if you want any more information about this presentation, just head over to the description of this video and you should be able to get everything you need, hopefully. But I hope everyone learned something today, this Indigenous Peoples Day. We're going to be signing off now. Thank you, everyone. Bye. Thank you, Steph.